FERA's legacy endures as a pivotal moment in India's economic history. It led to companies becoming more innovative, more competitive, and more able to endure the winds of change in a liberalized economy. Hello and welcome to the Secretariat. This time we're bringing to you a legislation which was really very important in the past. But let's come to the present. Investing in stocks and shares nowadays is a normal affair. Everyone does it. But it wasn't always so. But when did things change? Well, we have to go back a long way. In 1973, the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act was passed by the government. And that aimed to regulate the foreign exchange resources of the country and manage foreign exchange for the government. But it had a lot of unintended consequences and intended consequences. First of all, it directed foreign companies to dilute their shareholding to 40%. Now that was a big step. It did put off a lot of companies. Some of them didn't want to do it. These included IBM and Coca-Cola, who decided to leave the country. But the second outcome of this was that a lot of companies which did decide to do it became more competitive, more innovative. And these were companies even like Unilever, which agreed to dilute their shareholding. Cadbury, for instance, many other foreign companies agreed to dilute their shareholding and bring it down to 40%. So it was in the late 70s that these companies, foreign companies, decided to dilute their shareholding. You know, those days I was a young reporter and my father was in government service. I also had friends who worked in multinational companies. So as and when these companies brought out their public issues, my father tried his luck, my friends tried their luck, and even I did. So I wasn't so lucky. But my father did get some shares in these blue chip companies. One of my friends was very lucky. She got a lot of them. But then ultimately, another company came on the scene. And that was in 1980, a small company called Reliance Industries Limited put out advertisements for a public issue. A lot of people applied for these shares. Now, you must understand that those days, most companies would raise funds to start an industry from banks. This was a company which decided instead to go to the market. Now, just as I had just said, so many people were applying for these foreign companies which were diluting their shareholding. Equally, these same people who were middle class, salaried employees, could be government servants, could be very ordinary people in other occupations, also opted for this tried to get shares in this new company. Now, this was actually the germination and the beginning of an equity culture in this country, because these people bought these shares and profited from them. My father, for instance, as I said, he got these shares and he used them at some point to finance my younger brother's wedding. There are many stories like that. My friend, for instance, she used her shares in blue chip companies. She sold some of them and financed her children's education. Meanwhile, a media revolution was also taking place. Suddenly, a whole lot of pamphlets and tabloids sprung up to meet the demand of these newly minted investors. These pamphlets and tabloids were available in the street side. Vendors would sell them to you and they would give information about what was happening to these shares in the stock market. Ultimately, the result of this sudden interest in shares and stocks meant that those who had bought these shares were interested in what these companies were doing. So the net result was that a company like Reliance at some stage had to hold its annual general meetings in stadiums. And that was quite a remarkable thing for those days. Of course, we no longer have that happening now because so many people have invested in shares. But as I said, this was the start of the equity culture. So suddenly, people were interested in the stock market, an area that they were never interested in. One must remember, those days, general newspapers only had one page devoted to commerce. It was called the commerce page. And that had probably one quarter devoted to stocks and shares. But now suddenly there were all these small publications which gave this information, and there was a ready market for them. Now, this was a complete change from the past, but it was showing the interest in equities, in stocks and shares, which continued right up till 1991 when the liberalization of the economy took place. And it was then that a full-fledged equity culture developed in this country. Nowadays, every young person invests in equities. Mutual funds are some things we talk about all the time. But we have to remember that this whole process began way back in the 1970s when the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act was passed. Subsequently, FERA was transformed into the Foreign Exchange Management Act in 2002 because the provisions of FERA were no longer required. But it ultimately had a long-lasting impact on the Indian economy. FERA's legacy endures as a pivotal moment in India's economic history. It led to companies becoming more innovative, more competitive, and more able to endure the winds of change in a liberalized economy. As things have changed dramatically, we now look at foreign investment very differently, as well as the equity markets. We welcome rather than curb foreign investment inflows. These touched $81 billion in 2024-25. Our equity markets are also robust, and domestic retail investors have kept our stock markets buoyant in recent times despite external headwinds. It is now for the regulator, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, to ensure that investors can operate in a fair and transparent marketplace. Best practices must be put in place sooner rather than later so that frauds are weeded out of the system. This is the way forward to ensure that India becomes a global financial hub in the future. Thanks for watching. Tune in next week for another episode.